Hello and welcome to the Sixth Talk, in a series of talks on the documents of the Second Vatican Council given for the Year of Faith. This talk is given by Edward Allanson, covering both the Declaration on Christian Education and the Declaration on Religious Freedom, held at St Wilfrid's Parish Centre, Preston, on Thursday the 21st of March 2013. The series is facilitated by the Metanoia project. Edward is Head of Religious Studies and Theology at Stonyhurst College.
When I was asked to give this talk, I remember thinking, well, there are lots of things I want to say about education, and there are lots of things I'd like to say about liberty. And then I read what Pope Benedict had asked us to do in these talks, which is not to do that at all, but simply to look at what the documents say. It's amazing to me that it's taken this amount of time for these documents to have been read. They're beautiful, they're absolutely beautiful. So I'm going to try and put some of that beauty across without being overly technical, without putting in too much of my own spin on what I think it should be. Because actually I think this year of faith is more about what God wants the church to be. Pope Benedict spent most of his time as Pope and most of his time in the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith lovingly and thoughtfully putting forward a vision of the church which was based not on humankind, but simply on God. And I think that's what has come to me through these documents, the idea that actually our church is not based, as we sometimes think, on what we do, but on what God does through us. And that's something to keep in mind. Let's start with the Declaration on Liberty, Dignitatis, HUMANAE. It's very, very clear. Let's see where we came from, anyway. Now, I like Pius IX, and I like Gregory XVI, Pope, both of them. This is a quote quoted by Pius IX about, or from Gregory XVI. Liberty of conscience and worship is man's personal right, which ought to be legally proclaimed and asserted in every rightly constituted society, and that a right resides in the citizens to an absolute liberty, which should not be restrained by no authority, whether ecclesial or civil, whereby they may be openly and publicly to manifest and declare any of their ideas whatever, either by word of mouth, by press, or in any other way. It's exactly what this document says. However, unfortunately, Gregory XVI said, that is insanity. The idea of giving people complete and utter religious liberty was insanity. Why? Well, because it was the thought at the time that if you were to proclaim the gospel of Christ to someone, you had to blot out and stop others proclaiming their God, proclaiming their thought. So he did it with the right intention of proclaiming the gospel. That's what we should do, and I don't disagree with him. He went on to say, this shameful font of indifferentism gives rise to that absurd and erroneous proposition which claims that liberty of conscience must be maintained for everyone. It's not what we expect. It's not what we expect. We expect that liberty is a good thing. We expect that conscience is free. But that's not what's being proclaimed. And it's not being proclaimed because actually the important part is that we get Christ across to people. And that is key. But they thought the way of doing this, or they thought the only way of doing this at the time, was to stop other people proclaiming their message too. So the Second Vatican Council is actually quite radical in what it's saying. But let me start with this. It's the end of the first paragraph of the first section. It says this. The Church draws forth new things that are always in harmony with the old. The Church draws forth new things that are always in harmony with the old. Those of you who have read any Newman, Blessed John Henry Cardinal Newman, will recognize some overtones of what he says there. In his development of doctrine, he puts forward this idea too, that actually there's a continuity what Pope Benedict and others have called a hermeneutic of continuity, the idea that the Second Vatican Council doesn't just throw everything out. And I hope that's come across in your talks. The Second Vatican Council cannot and does not and doesn't even try to push out the old church and say, well, that's old and in a funny language and therefore we don't understand it and it's all silly. No, it says very clearly, this is a current progression, which has been misunderstood sometimes, but it's a progression from what went before. So, let's look at what it does say on liberty. It says this. Or why is it saying this? It says, more and more, people are demanding that men should exercise fully their own judgment and a responsible freedom in that their actions should not be subject to the pressure of coercion, but inspired by a sense of duty. That we shouldn't be coerced into doing things. It should be a sense of duty that makes us do them. I don't know if any of you have ever been into the Pyrenees in France. It's a beautiful place. We're going there over the summer. Beautiful place. We'll go and visit a friend out there who is the English chaplain to the Dominican nuns set up by Dominic. He was sitting on the hill and he said, look, I've got all these women from the Cathar communities who have converted to Catholicism. What do I do with them? A big thunderbolt or a big kind of flame, all of flames appears and lands on a spot. So he goes and builds a convent there. And there's a beautiful basilica of Dominican nuns, an international order of Dominican nuns who live there. But in the hills in the Pyrenees, at the top of the hills, you will see these Cathar castles that tried to block out. They were kind of Gnostics, I guess. They were trying to separate themselves from the dirt of the earth. They were saying the world is bad, therefore we must stay away from it. We'll retreat and stay in our lovely castles up and we'll do nice good things and love God. Good, but you've missed the point. The point is God created the world, it is good. Don't withdraw from it. There are bad things in the world, but that isn't the point in this sense. So why am I telling you this? Well, because at the time, there is a story, how true it is, that Dominic was asking, look, I've got to get rid of all these Cathars, these heretics. What do I do? And how do I tell a Cathar from a non-Cathar? And the Pope at the time is supposed to have said, well, kill them all, and then God will decide who was a heretic and who wasn't. Now, again, the right intention of spreading the gospel and stopping people from erring, but slightly, to be reserved, slightly off the target. Slightly off the target. Don't go killing people just because you disagree with them. You cannot coerce people. The Second Vatican Council is very, very clear on this. I'm going to skip that bit because I want to come back to it later. It says, however, this, and this is important. According to this principle, man's freedom should not be given the fullest possible recognition and should not be curtailed except when and insofar as necessary. Should not be curtailed except when and insofar as necessary. We must not stop that kind of desire of man, that freedom of man, unless, well, with some exceptions. And we've got this debate at the moment in this country, don't we? We like this idea of freedom of speech, but not everyone's freedom. We want to stop some people. And sometimes actually the church is saying, yes, that's good. You do need to stop some people sometimes. To stop other people's freedom being attacked too. Okay? Good. And it says this as well. There are many who, under the pretext of freedom, seem inclined to reject all submission to authority and make light of the duty of obedience. For this reason, this Vatican Council urges everyone, especially those responsible for educating others, to try to form men with a respect for the moral order who will obey lawful authority and be lovers of freedom. So this freedom isn't simply, I get up in the morning, I decide what I want to do, but a freedom that's informed, that I have formed, but more importantly, that I have, someone has helped me to form, most notably God. That my freedom is actually a free and utter response to the love of God. Not because I'm made to, not because I've been tricked into it, but because I want to respond lovingly to God's call. One of the key truths in Catholic teaching, a truth that is contained in the Word of God and constantly preached by the Fathers, is that man's response to God by faith ought to be free. It's a free response to God, not one which is forced upon me. So this freedom that it talks about in this document is very, very simple. It's a freedom not to be forced to do things. God didn't force people to do things. Jesus, in his example in the Gospels, doesn't force people. There's that question that comes up sometimes about who would you invite to a dinner party, or choose kind of 10 people. The one person I'd love to invite is the rich young man. I'd love to know what he did. We know the story. He goes to Jesus and says, "Teacher, what must I do to get to heaven?" And Jesus says, "Obey all the commandments." And he says, "Well, I've done all that." And at that point, he probably should have walked away, because then he got trapped. He says, "I do all that." Jesus said, "Well, give away everything you have, sell everything you have, give the money to the poor, and come follow me." And at that point, it's usually taught, well, he goes away very sad and disappears off. But we don't know what he did. We don't know that he didn't get down the road and think, "Yeah, go on then. I'll give it a go." Sold all his stuff and gave the money to the poor and went to follow Christ. All we know is that he was very sad about it because the gospel had taken him out of his comfort zone. So I'd love to have him at a dinner party and say, "Well, what did you do? Did you go? Did you sell all the stuff you had? Or did you just go away sad because you're a bit rich and carry on being rich?" And we'll come to this. This is the hardest story, I think, as a teacher to teach children. I remember trying to teach it. I was teaching it one day, and last year, and one of the students said, "Sir, so you think we should sell everything we have, give the money to the poor, and become a disciple of Christ?" And I said, "Yes, definitely. Well done, Dominic." I said, "Sir, did I see you driving in a new car this morning?" "Yes, thanks, Dominic. That's very helpful." As a teacher, you have to proclaim this message, and you have to proclaim it with some kind of humility, because you know that you're not following it yourself as fully as you should. You also learn that you shouldn't have incredibly clever people in your class that pick up on these things. Importantly, here's a part from Acts of the Apostles. We must obey God rather than men. We must obey God rather than men. This is the hardest teaching, I think, for everyone today, and especially the young people in our schools, because they're taught to obey the world around them. And I don't want to be hard on young people, and I don't want to be depressive about it, but I think it's the difficulty of it. That we're saying to them, this is the message which will make you poor and humble and a servant. Or would you rather have that nice new car? Would you rather have all that money? Would you rather have these lovely holidays? It's a difficult choice for them. They want to do it, but they can't. And they mustn't be forced. They mustn't be forced, and they mustn't be tricked. And we can trick them in a number of ways, and we can force them in a number of ways. And I tell you the most powerful one is that we can tell them that the gospel is less than it is. To try and water it down for them. And this happens all over the place. We know this. And I don't think it's a result of the council, but I think it kind of grew a bit more when we became aware of the world around us. That we said, right, we want children to carry on the faith. People seem to be leaving. So what will we do? We'll water it down. We'll tell them that confession is a kind of added extra. We'll water down the Mass. We'll proclaim the gospel, but we won't tell the whole power of it. We'll say, well, you know, Jesus wasn't really saying give away all your money. He was saying be nice to people. No, he wasn't. He was being very, very clear. And children see straight through it. And so should we. You can coerce people into and take away their religious freedom by not proclaiming the gospel in its fullness. Don't try and hide it. Jesus didn't. Did Jesus chase after the rich young man and say, well, go on then, you've done okay, come back, it doesn't matter. Or maybe just sell one shirt that you've got. No, he didn't say anything. He was very clear. He stood, he looked at him and loved him, but he let him go. And I think that's key too, and it's very hard because we have I think a particularly English mentality that we sometimes think, well, if I can convert lots and lots of people, no matter what it is, then I'll get to heaven and I'm very important. Well, maybe. But actually it's not you that does the converting. It's not me that does it in the school. It's God who does it, not us. And where does all of this come from? Why should we be worried about coercion? Why should we be worried about educating the young people and proclaiming the gospel in its fullness? Well, because Christ told us to. And this phrase comes up again and again, and this passage from Matthew's gospel again and again in both of these documents. Make disciples of all nations. And the document on religious liberty says this: in order to satisfy the divine command, the Catholic Church must spare no effort in striving that the word of the Lord may speed on and triumph. Yes, we are to give people their freedom. Yes, we are not to coerce people. But that should not stop us from proclaiming the gospel in all its fullness. It doesn't say leave people who want to be free and just ignore them and leave them to do whatever they want. No, it's very, very clear. You are to go and make disciples of all nations, because this is the fullness of the truth. The fullness of the gospel remains in the Catholic Church. It's not found elsewhere. Elements maybe, but not the fullness. And the Church doesn't want people to have some kind of partiality of the gospel, but the fullness of it. But only in that way in which Christ did, in stepping back and allowing people to make their choice. Not forcing them to do anything, but allowing them to make their choice. Christians should approach those who are outside wisely, in the Holy Spirit, genuine love, truthful speech, and should strive even to the shedding of their blood to spread the light of life with all confidence and apostolic courage. The document's telling us again, don't just sit back and say, well, I've got to let them be free so they can go and do what they want. No. Proclaim it with apostolic courage and the shedding of blood. So there you go, that's nice and easy. So you should be able to do that. Excellent. We'll move on. It's hard. It's difficult. But I want to move on to the Declaration on Christian Education, mostly because I'm more comfortable with it. But secondly, because I think it flows nicely from that point, to be courageous and to allow ourselves to shed our blood for the gospel. I'm very privileged. I work at Stonyhurst, founded in 1953 in France, at Saint-Omer, and is founded on and has in its old boys a huge number of saints, huge number of martyrs who shed their blood. And I think that's one of the keys to its success, because we have those saints praying for us in heaven. But also, it doesn't mean that we're in an ivory tower stuck in the middle of nowhere without the difficulties that lots of schools have. And that it's from that angle that I want to approach this doctrine on Christian education. The Sacred Ecumenical Council has given careful consideration to the paramount importance of education in the life of men. This bit scares me. What is at stake in the school is the salvation or the ruin of every single soul. Now, I didn't sign up for that. I don't want to think that from something I can do, souls can be ruined, but it is true. It is true. And I think it's something that teachers and everyone who teaches in any way needs to be aware of. That the actions we have in our everyday life, in our workplace, no matter what our job is, or more especially in schools where you're surrounded by these young souls, that are you going to lead them towards salvation or towards ruin? All men of whatever race, condition of age, in virtue of their dignity as human persons, have an inalienable right to education. Now, this is quite new. An inalienable right. Where does this right come from? Well, it comes from natural law. It's quite clear. Quite clear. It comes from natural law that we are given this right. Why is there a document on education? Well, We were becoming more conscious of our own dignity and responsibility, says the document. We were taking a more active role in social life. Technology and social communication is giving us more time. That there's more and more schools opening, and this was a pressing issue. And also the methods of education were being developed. There were lots and lots of people around at the time developing methods of education, which the church found wanting, that it wasn't able to develop the human properly. So they thought, well, let's put together a document on the church's view of education. Why is it getting involved? Well, as we said before, to fulfill the mandate she received from her divine founder, to go into the world and preach the gospel to the whole of creation, and, from the letter to the Ephesians, to unite all things in Him, in Christ. And this education should be suitable to the particular individual, adapted to their ability, sex, or national cultural traditions, and conducive to fraternal relations with other nations in order to promote true unity and peace in the world. And how should this education be brought about? How should it act? Weight is to be given to psychological and pedagogical and intellectual sciences. So the way in which we teach. People were coming up with new ways of teaching, new ways in which we should be teaching, new ways in which we should form young people. So it should use those, but always under the mandate of leading people to Christ, not to the kind of self-contemplation that goes on. It should help develop the students' physical, moral, and intellectual qualities. And they should gain a sense of responsibility through an understanding of and pursuit of liberty. Liberty comes up again, this idea of freedom. What's going on at the time? What's going on with children? Well, it's a time of radical instability. And it still is. There's a one-dimensional universe of utility. What does that mean? Very grand phrase. What it means is that pupils are led to believe that their worth lies in what they can do. It's still the case. They're led to it somehow. I don't know how it gets through. This is an important point. Teachers and all of us try to put forward the message in the best way we can. Advertising companies spend millions on trying to figure out how to get into kids' heads. So they're taught that they're as good as what they have, they're as good as what they can do, and if they can't do things and they don't have stuff, then they're no good. And this is what they were facing at the time, and this is what they're still facing today. And it's a fine balance between saying this is a lie, this is a counterfeit, this is not what God wants, but also putting it forward in a way in which they will respond to it. They were progressing beyond, and children were starting to see this, and they kind of do every now and again. You see glimpses of it. They're progressing beyond it, beyond this narrow universe, and desire to be released from it. Also today, I think, and it's more so the case now, they're uncertain about their future. Well, we all are, I guess. People in work are as well with unemployment. They're uncertain about what's going to happen in the future. We just put together at college a promotional video for a new qualification we're doing. And one of the girls in it said, I'm preparing for a job that hasn't even been invented yet. It's true. They're going to do jobs that we can't even imagine they would have to do. So their future is uncertain, but even employment is uncertain to them. They have enthusiasm about causes, but they lack an inner coherence. We see this all the time in schools. Schools every now and again will have, we used to call them mufti days, a kind of home clothes day. And they think, well, I want to help the poor people, so I'll wear my own clothes, and then the poor people will be helped, and I am fine. No. First of all, it's wrong. It's wrong in two ways. First of all, because it separates it from any action. I get to do something good. I give my parents money. Usually it is that they forget that. They think it's their money. It's not their money. It's their parents' money. So I get to do something good. That's nice. That's what they're enjoying. I give my parents' money to someone. Poor people are helped. It's all nice and good. Children in need, was it 75 million that they raised? It's very good. Very good. Don't take that away. But it lacks that inner coherence which says, why am I doing this? Christians don't give money. Catholics should not give money simply to give money. They shouldn't do it simply because it's a nice humanist thing to do. They should do it because it's the call of the gospel. The gospel, it's not an option. It's not an option. And I think, interestingly, here I am, just after the election of the first Jesuit Pope Francis, who is seemingly putting across this idea. He said that how much I would like a poor church for the poor. And he's putting across this idea. And people are latching on to all sorts of things about the fact that he didn't wear the Rosetta, the red cape, as though this was a big scandal. For some and others, it was a great sign of how liberal he was. Let's just calm down about the man at the moment. Just say some prayers for him. But there's this lack of inner conviction. What we need is a charitable outlook which is based on Christ, not on ourselves or on just this humanist level, but on Christ. But I didn't want to just be down on children, because I think they're often given a hard time. In a Catholic school, as in any other school, one can find young people who are outstanding in every way, in religious attitude, moral behavior, and academic achievement. When we look for the cause, we often discover an excellent family background reinforced by both church and school. When we find brilliant young people, it's because things have slotted together properly. Most importantly, because of their family background. The document's very clear. Who is the first teacher of children? Their parents. Not us. Don't send them to a school for us to bring them up. Parents and their family must be the ones who take that initial role, who lead with example. Good. What makes a Catholic school distinctive? This is something that kind of people started looking at around the turn of the millennium. They said, well, we've set up all these Catholic schools now. What's distinctive about them? Because there are lots of schools doing lots of good. And it's really interesting if you ask, and in no way am I putting down schools, other schools. I think we all fail in lots of ways. If you ask lots of people in schools, what's distinctive about the Catholic school? And they'll say, we care for people and we love each other. As though the other school down the road, the state school, they're all hitting each other and hate each other. It's nonsense. What's distinctive? An educational climate, and we'll come on to what that means. Personal development of each student. And these bottom two are absolutely key. The relationship established between culture, where they're living, and the gospel. And the illumination of all knowledge with the light of faith. It's not about being nice to people. That's good. It's important. It's a gospel value. But what's key is Christ. Christ is the foundation of the school. Otherwise it will disappear. Otherwise it just becomes another institution. There's nothing important about it. Nothing important about it at all if Christ is not there. The church has spoken about... The Bishop of Lancaster wrote a document on the mission of schools, and it's coming out more and more in the new Directory on Religious Education from the bishops and everywhere else. What's distinctive about the school? It's Christ. What's important? Well, they went through this phase of things not being important. It wasn't really important to have statues in the school. It wasn't really important to have confession or to have mass. Those things were good. What was important was being nice to each other. What's the key in a school? What's the key? Symbols which teach. The document says there should be crucifixes in every school, in every classroom. Why? Very clear. Because the teacher at the front of the class isn't the first master, the teacher. The one on the cross is the teacher. Jesus is the teacher. He is the master. It's not the teacher at the front of the class. The teacher at the front of the class is there to proclaim the one on the cross. Not the other way around, and it's not there as just a simple symbol. But these things were taken away at some point. Mass should be celebrated in schools. Quite simple. Confession should be heard in schools. If Christ is not there, then the school is not Catholic. The marks of a Catholic school compared to others. First of all, it's inspired by a supernatural vision. It's not about preparing people for the world in a way in which they are a thing, something, a kind of product. We're not producing a product. It has a supernatural aim. It's aimed at God. It's founded on a Christian anthropology. The human person is wonderful, but there is this kind of humanism going around that your body is free for you to do whatever you want. Yeah, it is, but it's not really if you inform the conscience properly. So it has to be founded on a Christian anthropology, an understanding of who is in front of you in the classroom. Who is it that's sitting in that seat? Is it a thing that you're filling with knowledge to send out and get a good job and your results look good? No. It's not. It's animated by communion and community. That sounds a little bit wishy-washy. It's not. It is important that a Catholic school prepares people to go into the community. It is important that the school is a community that helps each other, that feeds each other. That's why coming together at Mass is important. Well, obviously to receive Christ and to be there to pray at the Mass. But also to come together as a community is important, to gain strength from each other. That it's imbued with a Catholic world vision. Okay, that the Church is universal, that it's there to proclaim this Christ as its head. And also that it has an emphasis on faith and reason. It's not there just to fill them with pious thoughts. It's there to fill them with proper science. And the document is very clear on this. It says in a number of places, it talks about in a number of places, the idea that we are to engage in the sciences. If you talk to school children or lots of people, you say, well, what does the Church think about science? It's bad. It's bad. Science bad. No. Science is good. The role of the school is to have reason, our reason, and the sciences and everything else, all of these intellectual activities brought together under this Christian anthropology and this supernatural vision. The idea that we bring all of these things together and sanctify them. God sanctifies them. We don't fill them with pious thoughts and send them off, and that's fine, but actually they're a bit stupid and can't stand up for their faith, and they don't know anything. It's very important that they are both intellectually aware as their ability allows them to be, and that they have a faith, so that everything they do is sanctified, that they can go and sanctify the world, or allow God to sanctify the world. Okay? Good. Let's go back from that. Okay. Now, there are a number of questions coming up, and I want to answer them towards the end. But I want to just run through the document in more detail, a little bit more detail. I'm not going to bore you with it, hopefully. First of all Christians have a right to a Christian education. Not just those who can afford it, not just those who are able to get it, but they have a right through divine law to a Christian education. Ensuring that those who have been baptized are gradually introduced to a knowledge of the mystery of salvation. Let's go over that again. Ensuring that those who have been baptized are gradually introduced to a knowledge of the mystery of salvation. Again, the Church is concerned that the people in the school are made aware of Christ. Nothing else. And in this talk we go over and over again this idea that Christ is at the center. I'm not going to apologize for that. It's very important that that's the one thing we go away with. If Christ is not at the center, in the sacraments, in his presence, in the way in which people treat each other, in the signs we give, then the school is lacking. It becomes non-Christian. They should learn to adore God the Father in truth and spirit, especially through the liturgy. Especially through the liturgy. And especially, I would suggest, through the Mass. Not through some paraliturgy that's put on, although that can be important too. Their Christian education should lead them to make their contributions to the growth of the mystical body of Christ and give witness to the hope that is in them. That the people in our schools, the young people in our schools, are not there to be, again, put in these Cathar castles at the top of the Pyrenees mountains and separate them and hold them close. Yes, that's important, but also that they're sent out into the world. An image, a friend of mine who works in a school in France suggests that that's what they do. He kind of gathers together his army, talks to them, and then sends out these soldiers of Christ into the world. It's it's a nice image. But actually, that's what we're doing. We're allowing and giving them the strength in our schools to go out and proclaim the message themselves. The church then gives certain obligations to people. Let's start with the bishops. The Sacred Synod directs the attention of pastors of souls to their very grave obligation to do all in their power to ensure that this Christian education is enjoyed by all the faithful, and especially by the young, who are the hope of the church. And the parents, parents, must therefore be recognized as being primarily and principally responsible for their child's education. The role of parents in education is of such importance that it is almost impossible to provide an adequate substitute. They must be witnesses of the faith and love of Christ to one another and to their children. But who's to assist the parents? The parents need help of the whole society, of us. And education is the concern of the church, as its duty is the proclamation of the way to salvation, of revealing the life of Christ so that all may attain to the fullness of life. So the bishops have their obligation to provide it. The parents have their obligation to bring up their children in such a way that they can spread the message of salvation. And also in the document it says that parents must, if at all possible, send their children to Catholic schools. And then it says that there's also civil society, that actually it's all of us that can help assist the parents in their mission as the primary educators of their children. The church as a mother is under obligation, therefore, to provide for its children an education by virtue of which their whole lives may be inspired by the Spirit of God. At the same time, it will offer its assistance to all people for the promotion of a well-balanced perfection of the human personality, for the good of society in this world, and for the development of a world more worthy of man. We're moving somewhere with this. We're moving somewhere with this. Because what we're going to say in the end is actually that Catholic schools aren't to just be for Catholics. And I think this is a pressing question at the moment. And it's a question that goes beyond these documents. But at what point does the Catholic school stop being Catholic? Is it when there's a certain number of non-Catholics in it? Some of our schools the majority are of other religions, never mind not Catholic or unchristian. Does that then stop being a Catholic school? I'm going to suggest not, because I think the documents say that that's not the case. In nurturing the intellectual faculties, let's move on to what the school's meant to do. In nurturing the intellectual faculties, which is its special mission, it develops a capacity for sound judgment and introduces the pupils to the cultural heritage bequeathed to them by former generations. It fosters a sense of values and prepares them for a professional life. Now, as much as I said earlier, and the document said earlier, that it's not simply about using people as a tool to go out and get a profession and to be of use to society, it also says that's true, but the school has an obligation to make people intellectual as they're able to be, to push them as far as they can be, to be as academically excellent, says the Code of Canon Law, to be as excellent as any of the surrounding schools. It's not a place that says, well, academic doesn't matter. Academics do matter, a heck of a lot. But they're just not the only reason that we're there. We do have to prepare our pupils for a professional life, whatever that professional life may be. And then let's come to the teachers. What's their responsibility? What's my responsibility? I'm going to start with a positive. It says, splendid, therefore, and of the highest importance. Listen to this. The highest importance is the vocation of those who help parents in carrying out their duty and act in the name of the community and by undertaking a career in teaching. And very important. And splendid. Of the highest importance is the vocation of the teacher. But let's just flick back before we get too carried away. What is at stake in the school is the salvation or ruin of every single soul. So yes, it's an important vocation, but at the same time, it's one which is rather treacherous if you lose sight of it and get carried away by the power and the prestige that can go with it. Must be very, very important, very, very careful. It then goes on in chapter 6 to talk about liberty again, the liberty of parents to choose a school which will educate their children in faith. It must go out of its way. Civil authorities must go out of the way to allow freedom of choice for Catholic parents, for Christian parents. So again, linking the two documents together. Now here we go, and we can come back to this later if we like. The Church should give special attention and help to the great number of them who are being taught in non-Catholic schools. So as much as it says it's important for parents to send their children to Catholic schools, it also recognizes that not all do, and not all can. And therefore the Church can't simply say, we will look after Catholic schools and that's all we do. That's it. If you don't send them to Catholic school, over to you. Tough. No. It says, sometimes there are ways in which they can't get to Catholic school. Things like in America where there's that separation. The Church has to provide other education for those children. And usually you find in the States, when I've been out there, that what happens is the pupils go to school in the morning and in the afternoon, and then in the evening they go to a kind of church-run religious education place where they're taught about their faith. So the Church must provide for the children. It says this will be done, as well as is with these formal setups, this will be done by the living example of those who teach and have charge of these children, but especially of the priests and laymen who teach them Christian doctrine. So it's not only in the schools, but also in whoever does the teaching, wherever that may be. A school we shouldn't think of necessarily as simply a building. It's a place where people learn. And that can be in a school hall, it can be in a church hall, it can be in the family sitting room, it can be around the dinner table. All of these places can be schools. Paragraph 8. It is the function of Catholic schools to develop in the school community an atmosphere animated by a spirit of liberty and charity based on the gospel, which enables young people to grow in the new life which has been given to them in baptism. The school should orientate the whole of human culture to the message of salvation, that the knowledge which the pupils acquire of the word, of the world, of life, and of men is illumined by faith. Difficulty. And this was noted in the document, The Catholic School on the Threshold of the Third Millennium. It says this: the extreme pluralism pervading contemporary society leads to a behaviour patterns which are sometimes so opposed to one another as to undermine any idea of community identity. What does that mean? It means exactly what I was saying earlier. Sometimes there's such a pluralist idea of, well, that's fine for you, but it's not fine for me. You can believe what you want. There's no right answer. That can be so pervading in the church, and in the church as well as in society, that actually what we do and what the children do is step away and opt out because they're too confused. Because they've got people telling them there is absolute truth, and they've got people telling them there's no truth at all. It's whatever you want. Actually, I almost didn't become a teacher, because when I went for my interview, I went for my interview with for my PGC, for my training course, and it was at Oxford Brookes in Oxford. And I was being particularly pedantic, which wasn't good at an interview. You shouldn't do that at an interview. And the guy noticed I was a Catholic, the guy interviewing me, the teacher at the university, and said, he said, well, of course, the important thing is that we don't teach children that there is an absolute truth. And I kind of bit my tongue a bit and looked at him. And I didn't look at him and love him. I looked at him and didn't love him lots. And said, so is that absolutely true? And then I thought, oh, you idiot. You're not even going to get on the first rung of the ladder here. This is ridiculous. The transition from the school as an institution to the school as a community, this community dimension is perhaps one result of the new awareness of the Church's nature as developed by the Council. It's really important at this point. that we can have a school, which is an institution, but unless that school becomes a community of people, bound together with some kind of common goal, and in this case, the common goal is Christ and the proclamation of the gospel and this new life which has been given to them in baptism. Unless that's there, it remains just an institution. It's not a school, according to the council. I guess it's the same in anything. Unless you become a community, it's not important. We're almost there. Teachers must remember that it depends chiefly on them whether the Catholic school achieves its purpose. They should therefore be prepared for their work with special care, having the appropriate qualifications and adequate learning both in religious and secular. They should be skilled in charity both towards each other and towards their pupils, and inspired by an apostolic spirit. They should bear testimony by their lives and their teaching to the one teacher who is Christ. Above all, they should work in close cooperation with the parents. It says it all really. The role of the teacher is to be as educated as they possibly can be, in whatever that is. I'm a religious studies teacher and teach philosophy as well. But this is true in science. This is true of our drama teacher. This is true of our English teachers. This is true of everything. That they must simply proclaim Christ in everything they do. Again, we said we'd come to this. The Church attaches particular importance to those schools, especially in the territories of newly founded churches, which include non-Catholics among their pupils. These schools must retain the religious freedom of the individual, yet they cannot relinquish its own freedom to proclaim the gospel and to offer a formation based on the values to be found in a Christian education. So yes, we should educate those in our schools, and there are those in our schools who are non-Christian. And we should respect their freedom, their liberty, but that doesn't stop us from proclaiming the gospel, as we said earlier. Here we go. Paragraph 10 starts talking about universities, so I don't want to go too much into that. But really what it says is we should set up places, again, going back to this idea of faith and reason, this idea of being intellectual. We should set up university research centres which study science. We should set up university places that study everything, because everything within culture relates to our human lives. Everything in culture relates to our human lives. Culture isn't bad. Culture isn't bad at all. What's bad is our interpretation of the way we live it. What culture does, what we should do with our faith, is to sanctify that culture. So we should have Catholic academics in our universities. We should have Catholic academies and universities which study these things, which study the sciences, study medicine, study everything that we can do, so that they can be sanctified and the truth may be found rather than just their utility. And then it talks also about the sacred sciences. And then finally in paragraph 12, which is again another hint of Newman. Newman is said to be behind quite a bit of the kind of theology, or the start of the theology of Vatican II. It says that the key, in its final paragraph, it says the key of education is the cooperation of all of those functions. That it's where science and religion and faith and reason and theology meet. It's in that community of the whole place, of the sciences, where everyone sits down together. Newman uses the idea of, when he sets up the university in Dublin, he says that one of his aims is to make sure that all of these different faculties sit around the same dinner table. Because if you sit around the same dinner table, you'll talk. And if you talk, you'll talk about your research. And if you're there talking about your research, then that will help your research, if you're talking in a cross-disciplinary way. Okay? So what he's saying is, this is important. We must always aim for the highest academic ability we can. We must retain liberty, we must promote charity, but the most important thing is that we keep Christ at the center of everything we do. Absolutely and utterly at the center of what we do. Are we moving towards, or are our schools completely hopeless at the moment? Are we moving towards a place where, and we often talk about young people in a sense, in a kind of hopeless way. We say, they've gone too far down the path, they're too engrossed in culture. No, we do not accept that salt should become tasteless or the light be kept hidden. The people of today can still experience the need to go to the well, like the Samaritan woman, in order to hear Jesus, who invites us to believe in him and to draw upon the source of living water welling up within him. That was Pope Benedict in his document about this year of faith. We cannot accept that salt should become tasteless or the light be kept hidden. The people of today can still experience the need to go to the well, like the Samaritan woman, in order to hear Jesus, who invites us to believe in him and draw upon the source of living water welling up within him. And then I want to end with this, and then we can go into some questions. This is from Pope Francis, the Jesuit Pope. Let us never give in to pessimism, to the bitterness that the devil tempts us with every day. Let us not give in to pessimism, and let us not be discouraged. We have the certainty that the Holy Spirit gives his church, with his powerful breath, the courage to persevere and to search for new ways to evangelize, to bring the gospel to the ends of the earth. Sometimes when we talk about young people, especially young people, we can be pessimistic. We can be pessimistic about culture. We can be pessimistic about sciences. We can be pessimistic about everything. Everything's going down the pan. No. Christ is still in charge. The human person wants, in its deepest desire, which may be being clouded over by sin, but it wants to draw itself. It wants to go towards Christ. It wants to be in union with God. If it's not, it's because it's being stopped from doing that. And our role, all of us as teachers, is to allow our pupils and allow everyone we talk to move towards Christ. To stop worrying about other things and to draw ourselves towards Christ. And I think that's an absolute.
If you enjoyed this talk and want to hear the rest of the series, it will be available at www.metanoiaproject.co.uk.